All right. So thanks for those who are sticking around for this conversation. As I said before, we're talking now about this will be a design charrette around a newly launching National Center for Regeneration and Extension, particularly in partnership with North Carolina Agricultural Technical State University and Open Future Coalition. We're very excited. This is one of those sort of ground moments from theory to practice and seeing how we can help be a part of some of this change and redistribution of resources. I'm going to hand that to Katie Archambault, my co-founder, who's going to be co-moderating, and Charlie Hopper, who will be co-moderating as well. But before I hand that off to these fine folks, I do want to thank the co-conveners who've helped make the forum happen. So many of you have partnered with us, but I do especially want to thank the American Sustainable Business Network, Bluefin Investment, Eco Restoration Alliance, El Puente, Global Unity, the Guild of Future Architects, Heartland P5, Imagine World, the Institute of Ecotechnics, Intergen Family, Kinship Earth, the North Carolina Agricultural Technical State University, a long one, and I've said it a few times now, but thanking them profusely, Partnerships for Change, Pro Social World, Reconsider, Toxic Free Future for Our Children, a Triangle Foundation, and United Refuge. Just really thank you for helping partner on this with us and bring so many of your partners to the table to have this conversation. With that, I'm going to hand that off to Katie and Charlie to take us away on this next session. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to this particular conversation, especially because it was sparked in so many of our previous discussions. We've spent the last 2 days, and particularly this morning, hearing from so many practitioners around what some of the obstacles have been to resourcing these incredible efforts. And we're about to roll up our sleeves and start looking at some of what we're going to do about that. And I'm going to go light on context here because Charlie's going to stand us up with some context, and then we have plenty to go into. But I'll say that I'm delighted to share a solution that we're excited to put on the table that we hope will help really better measure and account for the incredible work that's already happening, put that on the map, and help us richly resource communities that often don't have access to local dollars or private dollars, rather, to unlock forms of public funding. There's more complexity there that we'll get into in a moment, but I'll first hand it over to Charlie to give us a brief history lesson on some of what got us here.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Jamaica, and thanks to so many people on this call that have been part of this journey for the last, God, who knows how many years at this point. It's this is a moment really more than anything else. It's a technical solution, it's a collaboration, it's a lot of different things coming together at one time. But I was one of the lucky people this morning that was blessed to be in the small room with Miguel after the opening. And it was so pertinent to where we are today, because it really is a moment in time. In the regenerative movement, the ends can't justify the means, because there is no end. There's only a moment of time where we choose a point and go away and decide how we're going to behave going forward. And this is a transition in behavior that we're going through in the next 45 minutes that really has a lot of potential to change a lot of people's realities. I want to thank Bob and Mark Bob Birkeball and Mark Beam for helping shepherd me through this over the last 5-6 years. NCA&T, Dari, express my gratitude to Mark Blevins, who has been just an incredible champion for 2 years, who saw a vision of how this kind of behavior and these technologies could change the way that we serve constituents and people that need help wherever they are, and just being a true extension agent. I don't know how else to put it, but a person who grew up in the system and loves it and cares for it and wants to see it thrive. And even Greg went, you were there 5-6 years ago when we pitched this very similar vision around a property and trying to use these same principles and ideas to fix the way we do things around a property. And thanks to Jamaica and Caitlin and the people who've allowed them to be in a safe space to develop what they have in this community that they have, so that it can be ready to do these kind of things. I think it's, I can't thank enough people. But anyway, I got into this many years ago as a landscape designer for 30 years. My dad was an academe. If you know anything about academics, he had 2 PhDs from Chicago. His first one was with a guy named John Hope Franklin, which when you hear critical race theory today, this guy was talking about it 40, 50 years ago in different terms. And then his second one was a guy named Alan Bloom, who spoke about the closing of the American mind, which was really about the defunding of our education system and the integrity of it and what has turned into all of it, you know, the gerrymandering of our states and everything. By taking the people's dollars out, it allowed the corporations to control the public dollars and has really changed the way this country has gone. And what we have here is a moment of trying to solve some of that by building new tools to behave differently, not necessarily getting rid of the old system, but fixing the guidance system. And the key to that guidance system is for people to be able to have input, to have real vision that comes from the community that is crowdsourced and goes there and so that the government dollars go to where the people need them. I was reminded by another friend of mine the other day that when we talk about working with government, and we talk about institutions and systems and things, democracies react. They don't lead. And they're designed to react, you know, and there's a reason for that. And that's so that it doesn't become a tyranny. And as we look at how we function in this world, it has always been the people that have supposed to be the people that decide where we go. And, you know, when we look at what's happened to the system, it is the lack of the public dollar that has allowed us to privatize the schools, to privatize the research, to justify the things that we do and not get where we need to go. And one of the things I've always wanted to do is figure out how do we take that money that left the system, either through tax credits or, you know, we have the other issue that the wealth consolidated to 10 zip codes and left the rest of the country without it in their local communities. And even the parking of money into foundations and DAFs and various things through tax deferrals. But, you know, the idea of moving all that money was that to get rid of the transparency. But by having the public input, it wasn't moving fast enough for those people. But at the same time, that has allowed these injustices to occur and things to kind of fall apart. And you know, the funding gap between HBCUs and 1860Us is incredible in itself, just by the dollars that they get. But there's for a lot of reasons. Not all HBCUs have extension councils. They don't have equal representation because they don't have equal funding and they don't have equal voices, so they can't do what they need to do. We've been lucky to find one in NCA&T that has really overcome a lot of odds in the way that they function and do things and is really trailblazing some ways here. But the goal here was to come up with a system. Like I said before, we were talking with the property. But you've heard Bob talk about the Blue River over the last couple of days, and there's a property there, roughly a $500 million project. And the idea was to build an education system there. And we had a nonprofit that wanted to develop it and others that would put the local money in so that the federal and funds could flow. And then they'd use that to build this infrastructure for the community. Of course, no one really wanted to put the local money in. They wanted to use the percentage of the tax credit or a grant here and there, whatever free money they could find, and the investment wasn't there, and years go on, it didn't happen. And then COVID comes along. And it just really kind of rocked the whole world. But at the beginning of COVID, I was actually approached by another group that had technology, and we were working with another university, and we saw the potential for a virtual workspace, that virtual connectivity could allow us to create these relationships without the barriers of property, without real estate getting in the way of the value of the contributions of the people. That if they're putting their work into what they're doing, if you could show the in-kind, you could get what you need to do and start to rebuild some of these relationships. And so that the state and federal money could get back into the communities. I'm trying to, don't have time to really share what we need to do what you do, because we'll learn it as we go. But the idea here is to restore our public trust, that by having the community's efforts from labor to in-kind contributions of materials to IP to money, to be able to put those together around projects and help people get where they need to go, not live in a system of permission that allows them to go when someone decides that they're willing to part with what they have. Because let's face it, they can't. They're all stuck in their own reality. I don't want to have too much on this, but the New Deal, when you go back to it, it really came down to, for every $1 of local dollar that went into the system, there would be $1 of state dollar and $1 federal dollars that would come in to do whatever public project we wanted to do. And that system still exists throughout government, throughout everything we do. And through there's 15 different agencies that use the same model to deploy our money and it's sent out there to do it. But right now, local communities can't put up the money to put in their sewer plant. They can't put up, I mean, look at Jackson, Mississippi right now. They're dealing with the same thing that our higher education system is. Look at all the bridges that are falling down. They're dealing with the same thing. They didn't have the local, even with this infrastructure bill, they can't get the local dollars in to unlock the state and federal dollars. So we saw this opportunity and we've been dealing with it specifically around education, and that's where we're starting, which I think is fitting because extension is what we deployed first before we deployed the land grant system. It is how we actually train people to go take the land. And now we have a chance to use it to put it back and to actually kind of flip the change here. And all we really had to do was change the guidance system. And after 2 years of iterations and changing, we finally got to the point where we quit designing for the funding that was out there and designed the funding for the solution. And that really comes down to Caitlin and a lot of her ability to do that and the network she's built to do that, as well as the other people at the table who felt the same way. John Pareto and Bob, Mark, and your vision over the years and helping guide us in this way. But that's where we are. And I don't, like I said, not going to get too much into it. I'm ready to see the deck. I've iterated it many times and I'm just glad to share this moment with everybody. And thanks for being in this little happening with us.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to cut to it, and I think you'll start to understand what we're doing as you progress through it. I'm going to start with some background on what this is an invitation to, and then we're going to design together. So, we're here today to convene a Center for Regeneration, and you're all invited. How we define a Center for Regeneration, it says here, regenerating people, places, communities, and ecologies through education, cooperation, and investment. Those are really the stakeholders that have been at the table yesterday, today, that are in the room right now. And so I truly fundamentally believe that the resources that we need to resource regeneration are here, and that the solutions are here, and that we're capable of writing the distribution of these resources together. And so, as Charlie mentioned, our initial kind of use case is specifically through educational partnerships first within the land grant university system, working with smallholder and under-resourced farmers. But more broadly, as you'll see how this applies to the 15 different federal agencies that Charlie mentioned, our mission here is really to at large architect and fund and collaborate with civic, social, and ecological infrastructures and relationships that help people, places, and nature thrive. Basically putting at the table every asset that each of us has and ensure that it's adequately counted to then unlock the resources that are often left at the table. Charlie was alluding to some of the disparities between, for example, predominantly white institutions and the US land grant universities and historically Black and tribal institutions. And it's a 50% disparity oftentimes that we're seeing in the deployment of federal matching funds, because as Charlie mentioned, when you don't have a private local dollar to measure, then you can't back that with a federal dollar. You start using your state dollars as waivers to unlock the federal. And so your pool starts shrinking year over year rather than growing. And we've been looking at, well, what's a solution to push that lever in the opposite direction? And so we'll get into some of the funding mechanisms we see there in a moment. But our initial effort has been looking at, well, how do we more effectively count what's already there? And so one of the ways we see to do that is by structuring an association where we can sign on people, businesses, institutions that are pursuing regenerative practice, be they existing educational institutions, on the ground projects, funders ranging from philanthropy to investment, and essentially map that which is already there, and provide accountability and transparency to the work that's already happening. And so one of the phenomena that we've been seeing that we're directly addressing here is that there are hundreds of millions of dollars being left on the table in federal matching funds every single year, where there are projects that are doing work that, for example, is in direct alignment with the strategic goals of the USDA and NEFA, but don't necessarily have the relationship with, for example, university extension to be documenting the impacts that are already underway. And we have the channels, as Charlie mentioned, we have the capacity through these existing structures. It's the way they were designed to be able to pull down these federal funds so long as we're able to provide the right reporting. But there's a gap in that verification and the reporting of the work that's already happened. And so what we've set out to do first is more effectively document and facilitate the work that's already happening in a couple of ways. One is through providing shared resources. And so let's help these existing efforts better see one another. Let's help them access one another's sort of educational materials, curricula, research, and experts. Let's share facilities. Some folks might have a building they're not using. We might have other institutions that have, let's say, a need for a training center, or in the last session, we were talking about folks who have land but don't necessarily have the capability anymore to sort of tend to the whole of that land. There's other folks who have the will and drive to do that but don't have access to land. We have the capability to bring in and better map kind of people and their existing capacities. One really specific example is with our partnerships in the land grant system, working with university extension. We have the ability to directly start matching mentors or some of these activities that are traditionally happening door to door or in spreadsheets, and start actually logging these mentorship and volunteer hours. These hours themselves can actually be counted as in-kind contributions to pull down federal matching and state matching funds. But once again, they oftentimes aren't being delivered at scale, or they're not being counted. And so a part of how we're delivering that is leveraging the platform that we've spent the last couple of years working on building with exactly that intent to bring together existing skills and knowledge and solutions that are already working on the ground, better connect them with one another, count their efforts. And so that's exactly what's required here, to actually count these for their proper reporting to the right agencies to unlock some of these federal matching dollars, but also provide them with the tools to monitor and measure not only their outcomes and impacts in direct alignment with, for example, the strategic mandates of the USDA, but even some of the ecosystem services that they're producing, some of their other impacts, so that we can start to connect some of these projects with additional resourcing opportunities. And so I'll be going a little bit more into that detail in a moment. But essentially the thesis here is that if we can support and highlight that which is already happening and make it counted, then we can start to pull down some of these resources. And it might be as simple as that. And then lastly, we've been working on putting in place the funding structures that are required. Some of these funding structures luckily already exist. They're deeply entrenched within our systems. As Charlie mentioned, we have a very robust system across 15 different federal agencies, where essentially if we're able to properly report that these projects are engaging in activities that align with the strategic mandates of various departments, they directly qualify for some of these federal dollars, but again, they're going uncounted. And so we've been working on looking at what are funding mechanisms that not only allow us to enhance the existing kind of federal allocations of these funds through these existing activities. That's kind of our step one. But our step two is looking at, well, are there ways that we can start taking some of these private dollars that maybe are right now locked up investing in larger projects, and find a way to pollinate them into these smaller projects, park them in local communities, and then enhance local funding or lending capacities so that we can essentially park those dollars back into the communities, count them, match them, and then grow wealth rather than removing that wealth from those communities year over year. And so that's the outline of what we're setting out to do here. Here's a little bit glimpse at how we're doing this. We mentioned our use of the Open Impact platform to facilitate this. I'll give you a quick glimpse and then I'll switch over to a message from Mark Blevins from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical that'll provide a little bit more context here. And I'll also move my very enthusiastic dog in between those spots too. Just didn't want to lose our screen share here. But what we're able to do, and I'll show you a real space that we have set up for this project in a moment, but essentially connect together existing projects and service providers. So again, they're not stuck going door to door, but we can actually log the projects that are already here, the groups that are already in place to assist these practitioners in communities and map them directly with technical assistance providers, with folks within extension offices, so that they can start to reach the edges, so that they can start to reach the projects and the communities that they're not necessarily able to do door to door by hand. And then provide these learning contexts where we can continue to grow these existing projects. And while we're doing it, count the mentorship hours, log that act of kind of growing and knowledge sharing within these projects, to then grow it further by properly reflecting that through the reporting. And then lastly, providing a really clear line of reporting by signing up partner institutions such as universities that already have a direct line of reporting to some of these federal institutions. We can then onboard projects from anywhere. We're starting in the US, but anywhere in the country, to then through that relationship, be able to document the work they're already doing and unlock these channels to have it properly reflected to enhance resourcing to these partner institutions and to the projects themselves. So I'll get into that more in a moment. I'm going to pivot over to a little message from Mark Blevins from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. All right, here. Let me just see if I can get this full screen.
Just last week, I was talking with some growers in the eastern part of our state about some opportunities that we have and some resources we've developed. A couple folks asked me some really pointed questions about actually deploying some of the things that we've been promising for quite a while. So we work really hard with the resources that we have available to serve small and minority growers here at Cooperative Extension at NCA&T. But my network can only stretch so thin. I need other partners to help me in this and collaborate. I need to find ways to iterate some of our projects more quickly and effectively, and to actually support the folks that we're charged to do. I'm Mark Blevins with the Small Farms Resource and Innovation Center here at NCA&T, where we try to be a one-stop shop to get small and minority growers the resources they need to grow their farms and businesses. And so we're an 1890 institution and don't have the same resources that our sister institutions have. Things are improving, but we don't have the same footprint or finances. So I need those partners and I need those connections with my clients without a whole bunch of extra paid staff to make all this stuff happen. And that's why I'm excited about Open Impact. It's more than just software.
Oh, Katie, we lost audio.
That care about the same audience, not just on a local level, but a national level, and with global impact. I'm also happy about the way that Open Impact helps me work with groups and projects to get outside resources going with those, so that university resources can deal with campus initiatives and we can see those propagated results happen. I'm most excited about the ways that we're going to connect my staff with our clients and our clients with each other, and also capture some of the impacts that we traditionally don't get a hold of. and to show and see the environmental and the economic and the social impacts that our work does and makes happen on a regular basis. So with any luck, the next time I'm with those growers, we won't be talking about missed opportunities, but about the way they've connected with each other and the changes they've made on their farms to really grow their success. I look forward to what happens with this conference and all the things that are to come with our connections.
Thank you, Mark. We also have Dari here in the room. I'll invite you for sort of some deeper reflections later on as we start to get into design. But before we share a little bit more about this invitation, would you like to share any more about your experiences in extension?
Sure. Sorry that Mark couldn't be here, and I didn't know Mark is very much involved with this process. Then I think my respect for him. So he's my supervisor, right? So my respect for him is increased from today. He's a very important thing happening, so he couldn't join, and I can feel in a little bit what you might have missed due to the lack of good connections. He's the director / co-director for Small Farm Resource and Innovation Center. That is just a quick example of what we do. So we have farmers services through all 100 counties in the states of North Carolina, where our main targets are small scale limited resource minority farmer. But as a land grant school cooperative extension, we are bound to help any farmer on our way, small scale or big scale. We are the largest college of agriculture and environmental sciences in the HBCU in the nation. So that gives us enough. I think it's not me and Mark only, it's our predecessor who has worked a lot to have that reputation built. So we do have administrator, the specialist like me. I'm a soil health specialist, as for example, there are animal health specialists, there are 4-H, family consumers. So we do have that specialist who have either doctoral degree or a higher educations who bring those very fancy, nice research, get the dollar amount from the USD or other funding agencies, working with people like so many of you. And then we train to the county agent or the extension agent we have in every counties, and then they disseminate those informations to the farmer. And this is not a one-way track. This is a both-way feedback loop. Whenever a farmer has issues, they directly either reach out to the county agent or to us in the main campus. So, and like Mark said over the Zoom, over the video, there are so many, our network can be very thin if we do not get connected enough and get help from all of you guys. So there are so many, and a lot of people get confused that there are competition in the market. Why people will go to NCNT Cooperative Extension? There are so many other non-profit organizations and people like you. We don't think it as a competition. We feel very lucky and blessed that there are so many funding opportunity right now in the current administration. See, if we work all together, our main goal is to have the impact. That is, I think Mark was trying to stress in his talk. We have to show the impact to so many people. And with one organization, we cannot have that impact to as many people as we want to. That's why have a proper disseminations, informations through as many people as a team. And then so that number of people we are trying to reach out will be doubled and tripled that way. So that's what we do. I would stop here. I can chime in more, but that I have to be respectful of the time. Caitlin.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll get a little bit more into that particular pilot in a little bit, but we're so honored to have officially signed up NCANT as the first member of the Center for Regeneration, the first institutional member, and I'll hop a little bit more now into what that means to be a member of the Center for Regeneration and how you can all participate. As Dari shared here, really our initial aim is to reflect that which is already happening more accurately so that we can unlock additional resources for the activities that are already underway. And then from there to identify further opportunities for resource, whether that's through connection to other projects or in-kind impacts nationally. And I'll get into a little bit more of the specific definitions of in-kind in a bit, and also connect them with other funding opportunities. And so Charlie had earlier alluded to some of these gaps in access to, where we don't have access to a private dollar, we have the sequencing gap and this timing gap in how to unlock some of these public dollars. And so one of the ways we're looking to address that as well is to create the right vehicles and structures where we can start to allow private dollars, whether they're philanthropic or whether they're investment, to start to enter some of these local communities. And one of the way we're doing that is by extending an opportunity to directly invest in the capacity of local lenders. And so we are setting up a vehicle called Local Impact Capital that is meant to kind of serve as the initial kind of springboard for these capitals to be deployed kind of at the right time within these project life cycles to resource these projects. And the way that we're able to do that, I'd mentioned earlier how we might, for example, have institutional funds that are now looking for ways to access more impact, but they're not sure how to reach some of these smaller projects. We had someone in an earlier session today mention, well, gosh, I'm in California. I'm not sure how to reach projects in Missouri, or I don't have that line of sight. Some of these institutional funders, such as pension funds or family offices, for example, might not have, they just, in sort of how they function, don't necessarily have the granularity to distribute these smaller amounts of funds. And so one of the ways that we've been looking at operating is reflecting and kind of aggregating these projects that are already here, and then essentially providing that scaffold to take some of these larger institutional pools of wealth and then have kind of the right processes through measurement and transparency and through local underwriting processes in place so that we can then identify some of these smaller local projects, $500,000 projects, $1 million projects, not just $100 million projects, so that we can then inject some more private funds into these communities. And one of the ways that we're able to, play with institutional funders in this way is due in large part to the fact that there are so many federal guarantees in place around kind of providing matching funding for the activities that are outlined in the mandates of these 15 different federal institutions. And so what we're proposing is essentially a stack that includes a process to one, sort of equip some of these smaller local funders such as CDFIs and others, I'll get into that in a second, with the resources that they need to identify and onboard some of these smaller projects, with the assurance that they'll be able to provide also some of that enhancement to those projects that would make those viably fundable by some of these institutional dollars, by having the assurance that the federal match is in place as a guarantee, that we have a rich kind of community of knowledge sharing and in kind and another resource sharing surrounding these projects as well. And so what that looks like is we're partnering with institutional sponsors. As we mentioned, we're starting initially with folks like land grant universities who already have some of these relationships, who might sign on to say, hey, we are here to support activities that qualify for some of these federal matching funds. And so if you kind of help us better report some of the impacts that are running through us, then those are matchable. There are other local lending institutions that qualify for similar insurances or guarantees that might be able to provide capacity too. And so we're looking to directly kind of channel investment towards these smaller local lending institutions because they know their communities better than anyone else. And so we see that as a really powerful mechanism to better pollinate some of these funds more deeply into these local communities. And we also see tremendous use for philanthropic dollars at this table, where we can, and I'll actually get into that a little bit more here. And so this is quite the diagram. I won't spend too much time on it, but I'll just kind of, the general premise here is that we're looking to put projects and community resources at the center and make those visible by properly pooling their resources, documenting the work that they're already doing, and then providing the channels that unlock the funds that are already there so that they can properly flow to those projects. What that means is that we partner with fiscal sponsors, such as these universities or other institutions who have access to some of these public funds, to say, yeah, if we sign on some of our projects, we have a capacity to unlock some of these federal dollars. We can then leverage networks such as the existing network of Open Future Coalition, for example, to identify additional projects that might be out there that might not have been visible to these institutions, to pool the capacity of these sponsors to reach more and more local projects. But we can just as well convene in-kind resources that provide everything from mentorship to buildings, to facilities, to people's hours that can also be counted. And as long as we're providing the infrastructure to identify and track and report all these impacts, we can then unlock more of these funds through these fiscal sponsors to flow directly back into these communities, into these community projects, and also leverage that entire infrastructure as a way to unlock some of these private funding opportunities as well. Because just as we can better document some of the in-kind or the impacts that are being generated by these projects, we also have the capacity to then report these guarantees to unlock some of this private funding and document that private funding, which, a dollar there unlocks more federal dollars. And so that's the basic overview. I know this is quite complex, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk through this. But really what we're seeing, the opportunity we're seeing is that what we're piloting in education is a structure that's in place in housing. It's in place across any federal institution that you can name with different strategic mandates, but it's a really similar model. But where we're starting is specifically through this pilot that we've been shaping in the Southeast, starting with North Carolina Agricultural and Technical. We're talking to Warren Wilson on Monday, through NCA&T. We then have access to modeling, enhancing their access to federal dollars through USDA, NEFA, and then partnering with local lending institutions as well to help enhance some of that pipeline of projects, as well as then private funders through local impact capital to enhance the capacity of these lending institutions to provide not just measurement of the impacts and the in-kind, but to plant more private dollars in these communities. And so we're starting out very much around kind of food and agriculture projects, but as you'll see here, that can very quickly expand through partnership with other agencies. And so the invitation to you specifically, I'm going to show you a space that we've set up for the center. But essentially we are inviting participation. The requirements are pretty simple. It's anyone who agrees to share social, economic, or ecological resources, infrastructure, impacts, and returns in pursuit of common regenerative goals. And so we're able to sign on. I'll have a diagram for that in a sec, so I'll keep it here. But we also are looking for partnership to help operate the center itself. And so we're looking for folks, including many of you in this room, to help provide some of the standards around peer review, around project vetting, around best practices, around how do we cooperatively manage the center, because part of the center as well is revenue sharing that goes directly back into these communities from the wealth that we're able to pool through unlocking some of these matching dollars. And so in particular, our invitation today is to start mapping some of the projects, the local impact capital, so private and philanthropic investments that might be available to start parking in some of these local communities, sponsoring institutions, in-kind partners. And so again, in-kind is anything from land to building to staff to time, and then organizational development. And so kind of shared think and working group around things like governance, best practices, and vetting. And I think I had one more detailed slide on what the heck I meant from the funding stuff, but we may have lost it, but that was enough from me. So I'm going to stop there and get this participatory in a moment. And I know I just missed a ton in the chat too, so I might catch up on any questions really quickly. Or if Jamaica, you maybe want to help kind of elevate any of the questions that are emerging within the chat. But I'm going to quickly as well, just as backdrop, and maybe I'll invite just a moment verbally of any questions or clarifications before we dive into kind of the design charrette here. Really what we have, part of the invitation is this. So at 6 Alive, we have a Center for Regeneration who started populating it with some of the projects in partnership with NCA&T. And really the invitation today is to start filling in some of those circles you saw in that diagram with other projects and in-kind and funders that ought to be at that table. We want to see people over here that we can start deploying in service to some of these groups and to start standing up more projects together. And we also set up some projects already that there's an invitation to directly join. And I'll get into that detail, that how in a second. I see Mary, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, my name is Mary Charlotte. And I asked a question in the chat, but I'd love to ask it to you all. You've talked a lot about extension services and the role that they can play. A lot of extension services really are not on board at this point with regenerative agriculture. They're like in bed with the agrochemical companies. They have quote unquote conventional ways of doing things. And how do you see the process of evolution for extension services and really nudging that along? Sometimes farmers can do that, but people outside of farming don't necessarily have any any sway with them. I don't know if this is something that you guys have been thinking about.
It is. I actually replied to you in there, but what it is currently, because there are no local funds, the local tax dollar has been removed that used to fund the local extension agent, that the local communities don't have a voice, as those guys that want to change don't. Currently in the land grant system right now, there's 3 private dollars, corporate dollars, for every $1 of federal dollar in the system. That means that half the dollars in our academic system are corporate interest dollars. They have no public oversight. They're there for hired research, and we see the trauma of that in our entire country. People don't trust their food. They don't trust vaccines. They don't trust all these things because they see where the money comes from. We've got to restore public investment models. This isn't public dollars. These are private dollars. But they're being parked in local communities, partnered with these nonprofits and these universities in a way with transparency that have that oversight. So we've got to build that in there, but we can't just sit there and let them keep doing this. We've got to turn the switch. But I believe, you're dead on. We've had tons of resistance. I would say too that it took a trailblazer like NCA&T that has a much more diversified population that can see that other world. Dari, why don't you chime in there?
Yes, I will possibly speak some positive things, as a young, motivated, and who is passionate to change and embrace the regenerative agriculture thing. I will speak on the university side. So we, as an extension personnel, we got a direct chance to work with the funding agency. I think the problem is a systematic breakthrough. It was like a systematic problem where there is not enough federal funding put through into these efforts earlier. That's why we had to depend on not on the local food, we rely on the other food services or the national supply and something. Nowadays, specifically under COVID situation, we felt it very clearly that we do need local food supply and we have to provide more funding and resources. That's why all these, people like you all are, or any other local companies or the non-profit organization and who do care for the earth or the environment or the soil health. Some people are ahead, and that's why the movement has started And this is a really good news, positive news. I'm not sure how long though, okay? With the change in the administration, that can wholly change. But the moment has changed, like we as an university faculty and professor and extension specialist, we do receive email every other day that this is the funding, not just the philanthropic funding, but actually empowering local farming system and that broken chain supply for the local food supply. USDA specifically, that's, I think I would give an example. I hope no one is working for USDA and can kill me for saying this, but they are working really hard with an extension services like us, any other land grant school, specifically for an HBCU school. We are an HBCU school, so that all these rural communities on top of urban communities and people in the local level, low-lying area, low-lying people or the low-income communities. So that's why this conversation happening right now in this team is so important. We all have to ask for more money, because what is my insight, there are funding, everything there, they really want them, but we have to be very cautious, not writing a fund and you got the fund, then me just got the fund and that's it. No, we have to have a proper workflow to have the local, again, the word impact, right, Caitlin? That's why we are all sitting right now, although we are all busy, but talking about the impact. Even if it is a 5 farmers, like a black farmer, the minority farmer sitting at the very rural community in a Barty County in North Carolina, if we make changes life of those 4 people or 5 people who can grow some local vegetable and sell them and feed their family, we should celebrate that moment. And we need more those 5 farmers in more 5 counties. So money is there sitting in the USDA, and people like us, we have to be the liaison to snatch that money from them and have to local through. As of now, the sad news, there is no proper channel to flow that money from that extension faculty or you people to. That's why this organization is so impactful, so important. Caitlin and Charlie, you guys are doing to have all those money and all those expert people's opinion and help them to get the money through. So I think the chain, that flow chain, is the dissatisfaction or disappointment right now. Funding us are coming through from the higher authorities, from the federal section. That's what I would say.
Thanks so much, Dari.
Thank you, Dari.
Emily, you had your hand raised. Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I have experiences. So I'm a farmer in central Missouri, and from everything, trying to get a plant disease diagnosed that showed up in the field, to trying to find a technical service provider who can help us come up with a plan to transition to organic. What I've found time and time again is there's no one on the other side who is fulfilling that role. We were lucky in the past year, we actually identified a really enthusiastic technical provider at the State Department of Agriculture who's been going way beyond his job duties to help us get confirmation on some of the diseases that we've seen shown up in our field. So we are hoping that because we now have a definitive answer on some of those things, that we can take that information to our farmer community and say, okay, we confirmed it's aster yellow showing up in the lettuce. It's going to happen in the spring and the fall. Here's how you can address that. Like, he's being a resource for us. We're hoping we can then be a resource for our fellow farmers. But it really is challenging to find those individuals, probably like Dari as well, who are on the inside playing that role. I will say that in terms of like general support for diversified farming, the folks at Lincoln University here in Missouri have been amazing and supportive, and really trying to gather some of those resources to then pass on to us, or even just enlisting us for research projects and that type of thing. But it's definitely challenging to build that network, and I'm excited to know that you're sort of turning your focus towards extension.
Thanks, Emily. Back over to you, Dari, and then I have some reflections on that too.
Yeah, I do not want to just grab the discussion up to me, but Emily, you are very nice not to say the bad thing about the extension. Yes, we are not responsive, and as a younger professional, I love to take blame sometimes than just put in the whole system. You are right. Those extension agents, sometimes they do not have the technical knowledge, right, the expertise. That's why they reach out to us in the faculty in the main campus. Then we basically give the trainer training, or do 1:1, or visit to the campus. And I'm not ashamed to say that we supposed to do more of this visit and help the farmer who has the technical knowledge. Like any soil health related issues, I'm the technical person to give the training and provide the informations. So I should visit more to the campuses, to the more counties and help farmer than I supposed to do. So so they are lacking in there. My suggestions, Emily, keep bugging them, because that is our job. For the extension agent, technical service provider, they're really great. Like I put in the chat, they're great, right? And they can go beyond and work you. And extension agent are very dedicated for that extension, that particular county. They are, if you make a good relation with them, you will get a good information. But most of the time, they might not have the technical assistance. But we, who are the PhDs and the doctors and the researcher scientists, keep bugging them. And this is your right, because the land grant school cooperative extension has been established to help you guys. So maybe in the beginning you might have some barrier to get connected with the people, but if you show your consistent interest or disappointment, I need help with this disease assessment or the soil health assessment, keep doing that, Emily. Things are improving, and you will always find that 2 or 3 a motivated person who can help you. So keep doing that.
And that's
let me give you a little cover there too. They talk about being able to reach it. And Emily, I'm from Missouri, as you know. The county I grew up in, the Northwest Missouri, had 12 extension agents as recent as 1990. Right now, it has 1 agent who's a vegetable specialist who covers 13 counties. And there's no other agents in the entire region. But there's a ton of corn and soy. and the rivers are dead. But that's what we have, because we've defunded the tax base that put those people in those rooms. And we've got to figure out how to park those back there in innovative ways.
And that's why, for example, where we're starting with NCANT is with the Small Farms Research and Innovation Center, kind of looking at taking some of these existing, resources where it's, here's a list of people or sort of agencies, but without faces behind them necessarily that you can call, and starting to really onboard the people so that farmers can then go in and say, oh, this is the person that has a particular skill in this, and reach out to them directly. So our first activity actually with NCANT is onboarding those particular projects that are, and people who have that particular intent and expertise, so that there can start being a really clear person kind of behind that door. And so that the time even spent interacting with that person can start to be counted to pull down more resources to continue to build up the ability to connect them with even more resources. So any other, in about 2 minutes, we're going to switch over to a bit of a design charrette. But wondering if there are any other initial clarifying questions, comments.
I just want to say it's amazing. It's great. And I just got an interesting article to your point, Charlie. I put it in the chat that was sent by somebody who's under investigative reporter, looking at how, just like you said, the public funding has been stripped away. It's a lot of that funding has gone to the fossil fuel companies. And so our tax bases are literally funding some of the worst and most destructive industries, while all the regeneration, once we figure this model out, it can really start to shift and drawing attention to where our tax dollars going. Where do we want them to go? To regeneration. So anyway, it's a fantastic article. I'll put it in the chat now.
I just dropped one too. Thank you, Ann. You reminded me of Big Ag U. NPR did a really good research project on this across all the Midwest universities, showing how the funding was being depleted across it, and basically they were losing the objectivity of the programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw Philip, you have your hand up, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just want to add some perspective. These are very rough numbers, just some quick Googling. Government funding globally in recent years was about $27 billion. Let's see, global philanthropy, about $68 billion. World GDP, $75 trillion. The government and philanthropic investment in what needs to happen is probably less than 1% of what needs to happen. We need to interact with the marketplace and tap those flows of funds.
Yeah, and that's a large part of this mechanism, Philip. We're really looking at how do we sort of bridge that by actually creating containers that we can flow institutional capital into. And so those are the first models.
Suggesting that these are totally different pathways than what you're focused on right now. I'm not sure who asked the question about extension agents and regenerative agriculture. I think the answer is to show them that regenerative agriculture can be, multitudes more profitable than conventional agriculture, independent of whether you factor in all the co-benefits of ecosystem services. Just direct profitability of regenerative agriculture done properly can outcompete conventional agriculture, perhaps by a factor of 2, 4, maybe even 6 times. So if it's done right.
Absolutely. And that's where I would say as well that by measuring the impacts of these projects, yes, there's an initial lever around kind of repatriating some of these public dollars, but those same measurements are precisely the measurements that are needed to provide some of those interfaces to demonstrate some of those other forms of return. And so that's really sort of the big picture. It wasn't trying to kind of overcomplexify things, but the roadmap that we're really looking at here is any project that signs on has also the capacity to reflect their impacts, to capture some of those co-benefits, those ecosystem services, and make those directly investable over time as well. And I absolutely think that we fundamentally can't have a conversation around philanthropy over here and public funding over here and private investment over there. What we've been really focused on is how do we recognize that different forms of capital being deployed at a different sequence within the project life cycle, if kind of done well, are really what can help us unlock some of that potential. For example, you might have an institutional dollar that says, oh gosh, that project isn't credit worthy enough for me to lend to or invest in. But then you might have access to, for example, a local philanthropic pool that can say, well, I'll put up a guarantee for that project, or I will provide some initial upfront funding that'll then, enhance that project so that it can, over time, kind of qualify for other forms of funding. And so those are the specific types of mechanisms that we're starting to look at here. And I hope that was clarifying. But just saying, I agree with your sentiments, Philip. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I would like to just really sort of give a shout out to one of the initiatives from the Open Future Coalition, which is the Open Impact Platform. And I know Katie has touched on it, but really, as I see a significant gap that all of these really well-meaning efforts fall into is that there's a lack of a cohesive organizational model. And so this tool exists and it needs users, right? It needs the people to get onto it and commit to use it as it's been designed. And so really want to encourage people to get on and explore, find where you fit in that system. It's very robust and it's going to keep getting more robust, and being able to make this is the mycelial network, is to be able to really have this a communication service that is ours, right? It's not going to get interfered with. We're not going to be bumped out because we're speaking too radically about this or that. I don't know, maybe we will if we get too radical, but just really, we're seeking critical mass of this movement of change agents to have a rapid response, and being able to have this interconnected access to opportunities, funding, education, tools, wisdom, experience, all circulating in one pond, I think is tremendous. So I really just want to encourage everyone to really take notice of it and come to it, and it's still in beta testing, but it's going to be important, especially as Katie's expressed, being able to gather the data and evaluate the metrics and see how we're doing and be able to adjust to that. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Yeah, that's kind of how we arrived at the center, as well as we recognized that tool could be that bridge to help connect the efforts that could not necessarily be reached door to door, and to start making visible the impacts that are already being done by those projects. And so very much part of the invitation today is to get in there. And so I will use this as a segue into our design charrette. We've set up an initial kind of space for the Center for Regeneration on the platform, where we're starting to onboard folks that we sign on as members. We do have specific kind of membership forms that we can follow up with, depending on kind of the category of member that you are. But one of those is just individuals by kind of signing on. And I'll provide more instruction for that in a moment. But our aim is to start to make visible the projects that are already out there, provide context for them to connect with one another, and then start connecting them with some of the in-kind people, services, and then also to be able to, as Elizabeth mentioned, measure and monitor those impacts. I didn't want to get fully into demo world right now because we've got some co-designing to do, but I did show some examples of those dashboards previously. And really what we're able to do in this space is provide kind of those full kind of group contexts to then start to kind of go in and interact together within these shared spaces and exchange kind of knowledge and best practice. I'm just going to bring us into a little project so you can see a little hint of that. But we can start directly working together, measuring those activities, exchanging knowledge, best practices, and have that all be counted in ways that we can start to directly match with funds. So, so then I'm going to switch us over to some co-design time. I'm going to drop a link into the chat here. I'm going to hand over the facilitation stick a little bit to Charlie. Let's just see here. And there's a Miro if you'd like to follow along and contribute, but we can also play scribe. And so we've set up a space for the center. And the aim here is to start kind of naming some of our existing projects or projects we know that it can make sense to start connecting in with the center. Again, you can be, and I'll also just to show the lay of the land, there's a space here for projects, sponsoring institutions. So we have a bit of a backlog of other folks we're talking to who aren't listed here as well. We can start to populate those in the space. For local impact capital, to speak a little bit more explicitly to that, we are in the process of kicking this off with the launch of a $100 million revolving loan fund to park capital in local communities through partnerships with these local lenders. But we want to be able to kind of co-locate that with other forms of capital as well. And so we absolutely welcome the sign-on of additional funders, private or philanthropic. The sponsoring institutions act as that liaison to some of the public dollars and guarantees. And then in-kind partners and infrastructure. And so if you have land that you're saying, "Well, gosh, I have this land, I'm not trying to use it." If you have buildings, if you have time, if you know folks who do, that's someone that it might make sense to put on the map there. And then I'll also, before we dive into that space, just orient us to, there are spaces over here where you can specifically kind of volunteer yourselves with some stickies around if you have a project or you'd like to help convene projects in your region, to get them listed as a part of the center so that they can be kind of measured and counted and access some of these shared pools. If you have funding or would like to help convene funding, again, that can be philanthropic funding, that can be private funding. If you have in kind that you'd like to, or if you'd like to help convene in kind. And then if you would like to help be a part of orienting this coalition together in terms of how we vet and manage. And so make sure by the end of this session that you stick your name in wherever you think it's relevant. We have spaces set up on the platform as well for little working groups for each of these that we'll be sure to add you to the appropriate project for. After this, I didn't want to take up time on this call to do that.
Hey, can you back out on the circle a little bit? And I got a quick change on there, but I think it'll help explain what we're doing a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Warren Wilson is actually an in-kind partner. It's a private institution. It doesn't have access to NEFA funds.
True.
Yet it's a 1,000-acre regenerative farm that has got their buildings LEED certified. One of the leaders in this space, one of the best facilities in the country. Yet they don't have access to extension agents to do what they do. So what we're doing here is pairing these private institutions where those dollars are already being spent with land grant institutions that don't have those resources. And by doing a cooperative agreement between them two, they can then get personnel at both spaces. They can exchange students. They can improve their facilities on both sides. NCA&T is getting ready to do a food processing facility. Warren Wilson's getting ready to restructure a lot of their stuff across the board. So by pairing them into one effort around the common goal of regenerative agriculture and how we, and regenerative economics, they've been teaching it for years. You know, it allows NCA&T to get where they need to go without having to change that 1862, who's funded by people whose interests are in another direction. P5 has been doing something very similar with Lincoln University and a local botanical garden, which is the private institution. So when you start to think about these big collaboration that's already exist, just formalizing that collaboration can start to connect those tax dollars that are buried in the DAF or buried in the foundation. And all that's missing is the ability to make the agreement and provide the transparency and see the impact of those results and prove it. And that's where, when we've been trying to do this with a lot of other technologies over the last couple of years. When we saw this platform was built, we realized that it had moved just, 6 months ago, moved just about 5 years ahead and millions of dollars ahead in development. So it's really ready to go.
I just heard about a family foundation that I want to connect you guys to. I'm going to, they're based in North Carolina. There could be an opportunity there.
Wonderful. Do we want to put the name on a sticky down here, or?
The Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. So I just talked to a board member just before going on, and I was hoping she was going to join. I guess she could not, but we could set up a call with her.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to popcorn in any examples?
Emily, I see you poking around in there. Your land trust is exactly the kind of thing this could work with.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question just to see if I'm thinking of this appropriately. So
MOA's buildings.
Yeah, MOA's buildings, but so I'm the president of the board of our regional land trust, Greenbelt, and we have launched a working lands initiative for the preservation of farmland and support for land-based livelihoods. And so, you know, we're looking at land access, affordability. We looked into doing an incubator farm project for to get land access for local immigrants and refugees. Most of that work to date has been supported by funds through the Patagonia Foundation. So that's an example where I feel like that would count as a match if we were collaborating on something, a bigger land access project. You know, there's a current grant initiative that was announced in August. It closes next week around land access, markets, and capital through the FSA, Farm Services Agency. But it's the type of grant that's like way beyond, I think the minimum, I forget what the minimum award was, but when I looked at it, I was like, well, that's just way outside the bounds of what our tiny land trust is doing. So that's an example of something where I would love to have partners where we're one small piece of that, where we can maybe purchase a farm that's in transition with retiring farmers and do a land linking site for the state of Missouri, which I mentioned in a different session today. But that's only about $2 million of what, you know, or not even, it's a small piece of a larger effort, I feel.
I mean, I think to put that into perspective, though, some of these entire state institutions pull down, you know, like low teens and kind of federal matching funds every year. And so, you know, even, you know, a couple million in kind can be monumental in terms of growing the services that are available through these institutions.
Yeah, I think I'm struggling a little bit with perspective on, I wear so many hats, first of all, the farming, the land trust, but so we're getting about, you know, in the teens, thousands of teens from Patagonia annually for working lands projects in central Missouri. So that's something that could be counted potentially as part of a larger collaboration, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to put some stickies to memorialize some of what you just shared. What would be the best thing to put in the stickies here?
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Emily, but you have a really impressive geodesic dome, and I'm gonna.
No, that was our old spot, but we do now have a beautiful. Yeah, we now have a beautiful field in the River Hills that is available. But there's
Bucky
nothing
would
here
say
yet.
sometimes you have to enlarge the problem to solve it, you know, and
Yes.
and that's where these partnerships allow us to get beyond those barriers. It allows us to add other people to the pool and dilute the things that are keeping you from doing what you need to be able to do it. So it could be that there's other land trusts out there that we start to connect into a broader pool. You know, we need to have that conversation broader as a project.
And we do have a network of Missouri land trusts that we're a part of. And I've had conversations with some folks at Cultivate KC about, they've come to me, they said, oh, we have urban farmers who are looking for land surrounding the city because, you know, they've outgrown their space, and what role can a land trust play in that? And it's especially in those areas that are in close proximity where there's a lot of development pressure, land trust can play a huge role in making land affordable. So yeah, there's a web of the Missouri Land Trust Coalition that could be a potential partner. The land trust that I work with is called Greenbelt. Not to be confused, there's another one in Oregon.
The Marlboro and KC Land Trust would also, which is about to grow into the KC Land Trust, would also fall into that.
Yeah, I think there's also Platte Land Trust that's operating in north of KC. Kansas Land Trust. I feel like
we've got another connection brewing where we're starting to put together one of these clusters up in Connecticut. you know, with the University of Connecticut, their entrepreneurship school is actually where it's tied into, not just the ag side of it. But as we pull it into that, if you all know partners and projects that are going on in the upper Northeast, you know, we've got another region popping up there. As we look at how the thing is fomenting out in Western North Carolina, what we think that will probably morph into is kind of a cluster of Piedmont and a cluster of mountain, where we actually have two kind of pieces there. And then North Carolina's got another cluster up in the Northeast. But you know, as you think about where these things come together, where these partnerships are, don't think they have to be locked into a colonial footprint. You know, they can happen interest wide. They could be a national cluster. It could be, the point is to pair in kind with public, and then put together the project through a good process so that the local impact capital can trip the switch.
Charlie, are you, or is anyone, Caitlin, are you connected? It's my understanding that the Kauffman Foundation is also looking more at localized, local opportunities for their impact. And they're
I've
out
heard
of
that.
they're out of KC. I was scrambling to try to save this farm where we actually got our original start just by growing one row of peppers in the backyard. But I was trying to find a way to keep it off of the real estate market. It's surrounded by housing developments, and it's just a beautiful spot. But they came up as a potential. We didn't end up getting the project mobilized quickly enough, but they popped up as a potential organization interested in local initiatives around Kansas, Missouri area.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, Mark, if you have anything to add here.
Yeah, I do actually. First, I just want to step back and say that this is so down the middle of where I saw a need from the work Bob and I have been doing on the ground, and seeing all the silos that we end up trying to connect, whether it's finance or whether it's the people doing the work on the ground, et cetera. And so I'm just to say I'm really excited about what's been created here, and the first big steps. It's really important, and just want to acknowledge that. I think Charlie, maybe it would be helpful. You tell me, given the audience. Let's say Powell Gardens, which is a place where we are beginning to manage significant acreage as a demonstration research farm with Lincoln University, with Regen Partners, with Evergreen Ranching, who you've heard from before. Walk me through, like, okay, from now until we get matching funds for those actions that we do start doing on the ground. Like, what is the process?
So what do you want to share here, Caitlin? We have a couple different, the way we did it with NCAT, and this was, we ended up creating a membership application, and instead of asking the university system to change, what we did here was created the center to the outside as a partnership, and they signed up as the first member to use the services. And then we have philanthropic sponsors that are providing their runway to put together the project, to help support us, to help support the work you'll be bringing to the table with GOFA and Culture Bank and what we do, so that we can take the bridge to put together the deal and really, put that first runway under the auspice of the project out there until the funding can be lined up to come in. So instead of asking everybody to wait for the grant, it's the thing we've always talked about. how do we design the machine that allows a funder to fund the impact or the activity to be able to go, and then the projects to move into place, you know, when they're ready to go. And that's really how we set it up. And then we have a sponsorship application where a sponsor can fund either the ecological or the social goals or the specific activities. We have a few specific activities that, you know, we have in there because, like, we need someone to fund independently third-party facilitation. A cooperative agreement can't be funded by any of the parties that become the cooperative. That's just one of the requirements. And that's one of the reasons cooperatives don't happen, because right now you have to wait in line for your grant from the USDA or someone else. And 2 to 3 years later, you might get it. So the cooperative falls apart before it happens. You know, so it's by that person can either go, well, they can go right into Open Future Coalition or the center itself as a funder. And then, or it could be, you know, right now we kind of lump that all into the local impact capital, because anything we can count that's not federal dollars can be counted as hard donations that then can also unleash federal dollars or state dollars into these programs. Likewise with the in-kind impacts, as long as they're not federally sourced, they're able to be used in this way. So a lot of it is just getting it in there and counting it and then using it. It's, you know, Powell Gardens is actually the precedent for this. You know, it's really the agreement that Powell Gardens did with Lincoln to just get a little bit of technical assistance. They were leveraging their existing budget as a private institution with the university to get some more extension help on the ground and some funds into those extension type activities, which didn't necessarily even go to extension agents. A lot of that went to region partners to fund that activity. You know, like Mark doesn't necessarily need to grow a 500-person staff, nor does he want to at NCA&T. He knows that Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project has hundreds of people out there that provide the service that could meet that farmer in a day, you know, and not have to schedule something a month out. But if we could align the funds to support them as part of a cooperative effort, and yeah, it's going to be complex, but the beauty of it is the software allows us to simplify it and to see it as a project or a group and the impacts, and not all the sausage making that has to go on in there. And, you know, and we as the center want to help provide those services in partnership with you all as well. You know, how do we write that as we put together that underwriting system? So it really starts to get in there in all these different ways. It's neat to see all the land trust pops up, because I hadn't even thought too much about them other than that they're a great vehicle for the model. But, you know, when we got into Appalachia, it's full of them too.
I know we're just about at time. Chris, I know you have your hand raised, so we'll hear from you. And then while we're hearing from Chris, I did want to also name, if you are interested in kind of rolling up your sleeves further and working with us to get this thing stood up, whether it's as a member of the center of the coalition to help convene the projects, help convene funding, help convene in kind, if you yourselves have in kind, or if you'd just like to be in the loop on kind of setting up the organization, please do just drop your name in here and we'll follow up accordingly and get you into the right group. Over to you, Chris, and we just have about 1 minute for you, and then we've got to get.
I just want to apologize. I fell asleep. Literally, it was 2 or 3 in the morning here, and I've woken up into this exciting discussion. But I just want to echo Charlie's thing. As we're working with you, Katie, and others also globally, and also there are people in Australia who are interested in this type of initiative as well. So I've got no time, but I just want to flag that we'd love to help. And, you know, we've got some systems people who've been watching this to help assist. So I'll just leave it at that. It's late in the day, and apologies, I passed out.
Thanks for staying up all night with us the last couple of days.
We've shown a lot of endurance. This is very forgivable.
You're welcome. It's been hard.
Thank you so much. Well, this is kind of a wrap for this session. But again, if you all have the Miro link, feel free to put your name in here if you'd want to make sure you're on the list for follow-up. We'll follow up with kind of the totality of everyone who'd RSVP'd for the forum as well, with other opportunities for follow-up from any of the sessions. I'm also just going to paste into the chat one more time the link to make sure that you have a profile on the platform too, because then we can just get you right into these relevant groups if you're signed up in there. So I'm just going to pull that up really quickly while I get us closed. And then the next session that we have in this room is on the Farm Bill. I can let Jamaica will properly open that session in a moment. And then those who are heading over to the session on communicating across ideological divides, that'll actually be in another room. And so I'm going to put that link into the chat in a moment as well and see some of you over there. And I'm going to hit stop on the recording for this particular session.